So I'll introduce you a little bit to our speakers. We have 3 speakers today. The first of which is Marie-Elisa Kusniemi from Helsinki University Data Support, and she is the co-chair of the Research Data Management Working Group of LUBER. She will be speaking to us today about the concept of data journals, give us a little bit of an introduction there. We'll then have Sam Hall. So Sam is going to be speaking to us specifically about the data note article type that is available on Open Research Europe. He's a senior content acquisition editor at F1000, focusing on Open Research Europe, particularly within the engineering and technology field. This builds on his almost 10 years of experience in open access publishing, and specifically his previous role managing journals within this subject area as well. And then last but not least, we'll have Barbara McGillivray speaking to us about data papers in the context of open research, but with a particular focus on the humanities. So Barbara is the lecturer in digital humanities and cultural computation at King's College London and a Turing Fellow at the Alan Turing Institute, where she runs the Humanities and Data Science Special Interest Group. She's also passionate about supporting open data in humanities research, as I'm sure we'll see, and she has been the editor-in-chief of the Journal of Open Humanities Data since 2019. So with that, I will give the floor to Maria-Lisa, and you can share your screen, please.
Yes, thank you for invitation. It is nice to be here with you today. I promised to Barbara to introduce you the concept of data journal. At first, I must say that I'm not a real expert of data journals. I'm not a publisher of data journal, or I have never been a peer reviewer of a data article. I'm just interested of different ways of data publishing and how libraries can support researchers on data publishing. That's why I have read quite a bit about the data articles and journals. Let's start from data articles. You will today hear more detailed presentation about data articles, but let's have a brief introduction. There are many names for data articles. They mean pretty much the same, like data article, data paper, data report, data descriptor, data in brief, data note, data original article, database article, database paper, and dataset paper. These were collected by the journal article. You can see the reference there. It would be nice to know why there are so many names. I'm guessing it's just because we are just inventing the wheel many times, and we are naming our invention slightly differently each time. Here you can see definitions for data articles. Data articles are peer-reviewed citable papers that describe research data. The dataset themselves must be freely accessible to readers and accessible during the peer review process. Data articles present and describe research data, enhancing their visibility and potential for reuse, but without conclusions or analysis. This allows authors to get published citable credit for their work in generating research data. Publishing a data article does not prevent an author from publishing research papers using the data at a later date. This definition is from Springer. The next one is from Elsevier. Data articles are short, digestible descriptions of research data that have been made publicly available either through a repository or directly within the data articles. That makes it easier to comprehend and reuse. I picked these two descriptions of data articles from well-known publishers, just to make you remember that data articles are not grey literature or white papers, even though they sometimes can be. And then let's move to the data journals. But first, look at this slide first. You might find a hidden message there. So journals are always business, even data journals. Okay, data journals, here you can see two definitions. First simply says that data journals are scholarly journals that publish datasets or data papers. The second says data journals are those that publish data reports on a regular basis, either exclusively or as a primary article type. I think I have seen a definition from a data journal where there was no requirement that data articles needs to be the main article type of the journal, but I couldn't find the definition now. I still wanted to mention this, just to remind that this definition might not be being agreed by all journal publishers. I think a journal can be a hybrid, publishing traditional research articles and data articles and call itself a data journal and something else. Journal can be many things at the same time. Here are some facts about data journals. First data journal was established in the 1950s, but most of them are at the 21st century. Most of the data journals are peer-reviewed, and some of them have impact factors. And the last quotation for Walters says that main point of data journals, I think this is the main point of data journals. And the quotation is that data journals bring data publishing in the mainstream of scholarly communication. Otherwise, data publishing cannot do that. At least now, we don't have any ways to get merit from opening data at web pages or in a repository. The only way we can get merit from data is to publish a data article in a data journal. So I was fast today, so that was all from me. Thank you.
Perfect, thank you. I think we'll hold all questions until the end, so we'll move ahead to Sam.
Thanks, Kelly. I'm just going to share my screen. Hopefully you can see that.
We can, yeah, thank you.
Great. Yeah, so as Kelly said, I'm a senior content acquisition editor for F1000, but I work exclusively on the Open Research Europe platform. And the research area I typically commission into is engineering and technology. But most recently, I've been focusing on data notes specifically and identifying data sets across all disciplines published by Horizon 2020 projects, and explaining the use and benefits of data notes to those researchers that publish those data sets. And I'm hoping I can do the same today to you with this presentation. So it's just to lead you through the contents of the presentation. I'll be starting off with the background about Open Research Europe. I hope many of you have heard of Open Research Europe before, but for the sake of context, I'll be giving a brief introduction. And then leading on to the open research publishing model. So it's one that F1000 uses across a number of different platforms and funders, and one which Open Research Europe uses as well, of course. Then I'll be getting into the details of what exactly a data note is, what the benefits of publishing a data note are as well, especially in regards to Horizon Europe and Open Research Europe. And then leading you through to how a published data note looks on Open Research Europe, how the data availability statement appears as well, because it's a crucial bit of information. when a data note can be published within a research project. And also I want to identify and highlight the misconceptions that I've encountered so far in reaching out to these authors of data sets so far, and their misconceptions of that relationship between the data set and the data note. And then finally, some further resources which you can pursue in your own time, more generally about open data, for example, as well as some guidelines should you wish to direct any researchers towards Open Research Europe, and data notes, of course. So yeah, leading into the background of Open Research Europe, it was launched in March 2021, so only last year. And the ambitions behind launching Open Research Europe was because the Commission wanted a fully open access platform which leads by example. So as many of you are probably aware, recipients of European Commission funding are mandated to publish their research open access. So Open Research Europe is a platform for this, but more so it's a open research platform. So it's not just the article itself, which is open access, but the whole research process, including peer review, for example, is also surfaced on the platform. It also promotes the early sharing of research without editorial bias. So the authors themselves decide what research they wish to publish on the platform, and it's then processed through peer review without any editorial decisions on the way. So no accept or reject decisions before it meets peer review, and it's judged on the merits and the quality of that research alone. We also ask for all data relating to the projects to be linked to trusted repositories. So whatever the article type, we ask for the underlying data to be published alongside in an open data repository. We also promote article level metrics as indicators of quality. So we want to move away from the impact factor as an indicator of quality. And again, we want articles to be judged for their inherent value rather than the kind of reputation of the platform in which, or the journal in which they're published. It's a transparent and cost-effective platform. We charge €780 per article published, but we charge it directly to the Commission. So this is known as a diamond open access model because we charge the funder directly, and this is considered to be a more sustainable model in the long term. And as well, relating specifically to data notes, we want to capture all possible research outputs throughout a research project. So I believe we have about 14 different article types across 6 research areas. So Open Research Europe publishes within all research areas, and those 14 article types more or less are available in each of those, and data notes incidentally is available in each of those areas as well. And this feeds into a mantra which you may have heard before, which is we want data and research to be as open as possible and as closed as necessary. So yeah, there are exceptions where data may not be open, but we want that to be only when absolutely necessary. So leading on to what the open research model actually looks like. So in this diagram, you can see from left to right the process going from the article submission. So when the author clicks that submit button and fills in those initial details, it's picked up by our editorial team, and they undertake some initial editorial checks. So the scope of the article, for example, checking for plagiarism, and just basic editorial and ethical checks that you'd expect of any academic publication. And then they'll also check for data availability as well. So make that initial assessment as to whether the data has been published in an appropriate repository. If it hasn't, then we could advise the authors as to where might be most appropriate. And we also have a list of endorsed repositories as well, which you can refer to. So yeah, once any queries have been answered by the author, that's when, and they've been answered satisfactorily by our editorial team, that's when the publication goes live on our platform, and that's when it receives a DOI, it's immediately citable, and it's immediately readable and reusable on the platform. And then actually that's when the peer review process begins. So we have a post-publication peer review model, and the reviewers can be nominated by the authors themselves, or if they're unable to, for whatever reason, we can also use a database of reviewers. The identities of the reviewers are known to the author, and vice versa, the author's identity is known to the reviewers. And the verdicts delivered by the reviewers, which you can see summarized here as approved, approved with reservation, and not approved, is a bit different to what you may be familiar with journals. When we say approved, for example, we're saying the article is scientifically sound with few, if any, very minor revisions required. Whereas if it's approved with reservations, it might be that some revisions are required to make the paper scientifically sound. And if it's not approved, that means that generally the conclusions are not scientifically sound and there's actually major work that needs to be done. But the important thing is it's kept in this kind of it's kept in the system, and the author has every opportunity to revise that article, even if it's not approved in the first instance. And then once that conversation begins, what we're looking for is a kind of minimum threshold of quality before it's then sent to the indexes. And that threshold is either 2 approved verdicts or 1 approved verdict with 2 approved reservations. And if that seems confusing to you, maybe looking at the icons on the slide is a little bit clearer. But obviously, once that article is then accepted, like I said, or once it's then passed to indexes, including Scopus, for example, OpenAir, and that's when the article is obviously then gets even greater exposure. So you can imagine in the instance of a data note, it enhances the work even further. So going into detail into precisely what a data note is, as we've just seen, there's many different kind of variations in terms of, data articles or variants of. So a data note is something, one article type, which we publish, like I said, on Open Research Europe, but across the F1000 platform as well. And briefly, it's a short article which describes why and how a data set was collected. And it does this by providing a data set rationale, protocol, validation, and any limitation details, if there are any. It also includes information on where and how to access the data set, and also it uses a formal data citation as well. As I said, as you've seen before, a data note, just like any other article type on our platform, is fully peer reviewed. What makes a data note unique in terms of its peer review is that we ask the reviewers to check the methods have been sufficiently reported in the article and the data set has been published in the FAIR data format. And I hope many of you are familiar with FAIR, but just in case, FAIR stands for findable, accessible, interoperable, and reusable. And I'll be going into a bit more details to precisely what that means a little bit later. And also to kind of nip this in the bud quite early, a data note does not provide any analysis or conclusions, so that's reserved more for more general research articles. And also, it does not prevent the publication of a research article using the same data set. So even if the data set has been used as a supplementary file somewhere else, or it's been referred to in another research article with another publisher, then that doesn't preclude you from also publishing a data note on Open Research Europe. So then going into benefits, well, it increases the visibility and certification of the data set. As I said, it is peer reviewed, so it certifies the quality of the research undertaken and the quality of the data that's been collected. And it also raises the visibility through not just publishing on our platform, but also being indexed in many different venues, as I've mentioned before. It also promotes effective data management practices, and it can form an integral part of the data management plan as well. So with Horizon funding, you are asked to submit a data management plan, and by including a data note in that planning, you can actually enhance best practice in collecting that data and ensuring that it reaches the right people. From a researcher's perspective, they also receive extra credit for the work they do. So it's not just obviously the research resulting from the data, but they also get credit for the data which may not have be included in their main research article. You can also be assured, as you can with any other article type that you publish with Open Research Europe, that it meets the European Commission's Horizon funding mandate, and not just that, it actually exceeds that mandate and reaches like the highest standard of open research practices. It also enhances those FAIR credentials, which I mentioned earlier. So, for example, it makes the data set that the data note refers to as being more findable, because it creates that extra bibliographic record which points to the data set. And if the data set has not yet been deposited, our editorial team will also assist in making sure the data is accessible and interoperable. And this is by providing advice, or this is through providing advice on preparing the data and choosing an appropriate repository for that data. Finally, it also makes the data more reusable by providing greater context for that data set, and it ensures other researchers may use that same data but in different settings. So it just maximizes the kind of context, and it maximizes others interpretation of how that data set can be used. Excuse me, take a swig of water. So this is how a published data note appears on Open Research Europe, and I'll just, if you notice the numbered icons on the left and right there, I'll just go through these. So in the top left, you can see the viewing metrics and the downloads and the citations associated with this data note. And again, it's worth clarifying that this is only to the data note itself. So the data set will have its own viewing metrics, which are hopefully surfaced on the data repository itself. And then moving down, you've got a more standardized article title, but what's different here is that it's included the version of the article and its peer review status in the parentheses there. And then below that, what's quite unique here and something that I was really keen to point out is that the data note could be curated within article collections on Open Research Europe. So it's one of many features that we have. So rather than the data note just sit by itself like a data set, kind of siloed in its own kind of repository or its own kind of area, we can actually elevate it into or curate it into a broader collection. So in this particular example, it was part of a conference. So this data set was clearly presented at this particular conference called Energy Systems Modeling, and those authors have then submitted their data note as part of the collection later on. Below that, you've got an abstract, which as I'm sure you're aware, that's typically the most common thing that's pulled out for indexes. So it's often a key part of the description of the data set, sorry, the data note and the data set. But also you've got a plain, below that, I'm not going to scroll through the whole article, but below that you've got a plain language summary as well, which again enhances that discoverability and readability for others and the reusability of it as well as just basic kind of things that you'd expect with an article, you know, generally structured articles. So an introduction, materials and methods, and use and limitations as well. Finally, on the right-hand side is the open review panel. So as you can see, each version is actually viewable, and you can see the approval status from the reviewers on each one of those versions and the kind of the process that the data note has been through in order to meet that requirement. You can also see numbered 1, 2, and 3, the reviewers below. It's also worth pointing out that this can all be linked to authors' ORCID IDs as well, so they get extra credibility, whether that's the authors of the data note or the reviewers. They can assign it to their ORCID and they get extra credibility that way as well. And then the right-hand side, I've just highlighted again what these terms mean: approved, approval reservations, and not approved. And you see they're summarized in ticks and question marks in this instance. And the article actually passed peer review, having received 2 approved verdicts. This is how the data availability statement appears on the platform. So as you can imagine, this is a very key component of data note, as it is across all article types that we publish. So the first thing to note is the link to the data set itself. So in this case, it's hosted on a repository called HydroShare, and it links directly out to that. And then below that, you've got the authors have explained any of the underlying data which they've used or built upon with this data set. And then finally, the license on which the data set has been published. Now, this is a key component. And again, I hope many are familiar with Creative Commons licensing, but we typically recommend that authors publish their data under a Creative Commons attribution license, CC BY. This is one of the more open licenses, or Creative Commons Zero, which is no attribution. It's effectively a public domain license, but again, using one of these 2 licenses makes the data as open as possible, and meets those fair criteria that I discussed earlier in terms of being findable, accessible, interoperable, and reusable. So going on to when a data note can be published. In short, we want it published as soon as possible, and you want it published as soon as possible too, because this ensures that it's findable as soon as possible and that you get the credit for your work as early as possible. It can be built on as early as possible too. Like I said earlier, it receives a DOI, so it immediately becomes citable on our platform. But that doesn't preclude you, it doesn't stop you from publishing at other points during your research process. So this graphic actually shows more research article types that we include on our platform. It's not exhaustive, but you can see ideally we want the data note to be published as soon as data collection has concluded. or even sooner. So as I say, yeah, that maximizes its discoverability, but it could also be published alongside your main research article. So again, just enhancing that data set with more description, so it can be reused more easily. But it can also be published long after the research project is concluded as well. So it's worth pointing out that with Horizon projects, you have always got the possibility of publishing with Open Research Europe. You're not limited as to how many article types you publish on the platform. And yeah, it's always available to you, whether that's through the data note or through any of these number of article types that we publish. And lastly, some misconceptions. So as I said, I recently ran a data note campaign, and I'm still doing it, in fact, where I was actually looking for data sets that have been deposited on Zenodo and that have been part of Horizon projects or resulting from Horizon projects, and contacting these researchers and asking them and informing them of data notes, and obviously talking about the benefits that I've spoken about today. And it was really interesting to receive emails from them in terms of the misconceptions that they already had. Obviously, as we've said, data notes and the variance of data articles is relatively new within academic publishing, so it's understandable that there may be some misconceptions along the way. But I just wanted to go through a few key ones resulting from my outreach. So the first one I wanted to cover is that this misconception that if the data set is already described in the metadata, then a data note is not necessary. And this simply isn't true. I can understand why, because metadata, as we all know, describes data, but it describes it in a very categorical kind of normative way. It doesn't provide the kind of rich description that a data note does. So a data note is an article in itself. It can be as long as 5,000 words, for example, or even longer. So as you can imagine, that provides a richer description. And again, it just elevates the kind of discoverability of the article with that description, as well as its reusability, because it adds more and more context. So the metadata that sits with the data set on the repository is very separate from the data note, which again is points to the data note and describes it in greater detail. Also, the next misconception, the data set is already linked as a supplementary file from a published research article, so it may be published in another journal, for example. So the author may consider this to be a duplicate publication, unless it was copy and pasted word for word. You know, that's not the case. So as I said, if a article has been published elsewhere from the same project, using the same data set, that's absolutely fine. What we're looking for is something original in the data note, but it's not considered a duplicate publication to be pointing to the same data set that you've already used. You know, you as a researcher should be motivated to maximize their kind of bibliographic record of all the research that they've done, and whether a research article has already been published using that data set should not deter them from adding to their record using a data note. Finally, publishing a data note will require redepositing the data in ORE or in another data repository. Now, this simply isn't true, because ORE is not a data repository. It's something which comes up occasionally. We are a publishing platform, like any other journal, for example. We do things slightly differently, admittedly, but like I said, we are only asking for researchers to to point towards their data set via a link. We're not asking them to re-upload it or to do anything strenuous in that respect or anything administrative. We're only asking them to describe their data set in a research article, and we're not asking them also to we have got an approved list of data repositories, but as long as the data repository that the author is using meets those FAIR criteria that I mentioned earlier, then by all means the author does not need to do anything further in that respect. And as I said, there is more details about those data repositories in the further resources page. So one page that I'd like you to visit, going from the ORE homepage, in fact, you see a little drop-down menu called Resource Hub, and we've got a dedicated page to data notes where you can pull out some really nice graphics some of which are new, you may not have seen here today. So please feel free to reuse that information if you wish. We also have dedicated author guidelines for STM, humanities and social science disciplines. So as I said, data notes can be published across all of these, but we also recognize kind of like the different approaches that each of these areas may take towards publishing data and how a data note may look for each of these. So that's why we have dedicated guidelines for each of these areas. Also, my colleagues, James Barker and Rebecca Grant, they hosted a really good webinar recently titled their Data Reuse Success Stories, How to Ensure Your Data is Reused. So this takes a broader look at open data through F1000, but also identifies in greater detail some of those things which I've talked about today, including FAIR. So if you want to dig into that a little bit better, please do. Rebecca also talks brilliantly about her own experience of depositing data and thinking about the different file types that you need to think about when depositing the data to make sure that it can be picked up and reused, for example. And finally, I haven't mentioned this yet, but this particular article at the bottom, the citation advantage for linking publications to research data, this actually concludes that research data published alongside a published article can actually result in a 25% increase in citations. So it, explicitly demonstrates how publishing your research data can result in greater visibility and credit for your work, as well as reusability and collaboration with other researchers, and that's published on PLOS. So please do take a look at that. Thank you so much for your time. As you can see, my email address is here, and please do follow us on Twitter if you haven't already. Thank you very much.
Excellent. Thank you, Sam. I do have one quick question before you hide away. The 25% increase in citations, is that on the data note article or on the full research article, or either or?
I think that's in research articles in general. It's not data notes specifically. So I think it's promoting the benefits of researchers sharing as much data as they possibly can, and that obviously elevating the visibility of their published research article.
Actually, I can say so because I was an author of that paper.
Perfect. Go for it then, Barbara.
Yeah, so we analyzed data availability statements in kind of general research articles. So we looked at that little text snippet where people can say the data is available here, or the data is available upon request, or the data isn't available. And so that's where we focused our attention, and we looked at the impact of having an actual link in that statement on the citation of the paper.
As opposed to having a data available upon request statement in that box.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah. Right. Yeah, we jumped a little bit into questions there. It was my fault. Sorry. I will hand back over to Barbara for you to carry on with your presentation now. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Let me just share my screen. Okay, yes. Hi, everyone. I'm Barbara McGillivray from King's College London, and today I'm wearing mainly my hat as Editor-in-Chief of the Journal of Open Humanities Data. So you've already heard very nice words about open research and data papers and data journals. I will speak about my perspective coming from humanities disciplines and the role of the Journal of Open Humanities Data in this. So we're talking about open humanities data. So I'd just like to focus on the second part of this phrase, humanities data, because of course the humanities have produced and collected data for centuries. Think of libraries, archives, all the manuscripts that have come to us through centuries. So there's nothing new in producing data, even for the humanities. What's new today, or has been new for a few decades now, is the large-scale digitization project that have offered us access to a very large collections of data in digital format. And what does that mean? It means that well, of course, we can access these data sets from anywhere in the world, in many cases for free, but more importantly, the fact that they are available in digital format means that they can also be analyzed and mined computationally. And so that opens up a whole range of new possibilities and opportunities for doing actual humanities research. So we have a range of data sets that all fall into this big category of humanities data, because the humanities itself is a very, very broad area of disciplines. We have anything from maps, manuscripts, images, video, media content, text, tables, databases. We found a whole range of different data types that are all relevant to humanities projects. And all of these, goes on, surveys, dictionaries, recordings. They all have different features, but they all count as data sets. And that was actually one of the main first hurdles that we found when working on the journal, that many humanists don't quite recognize their work as having to do with data. They might call their data sets with different terms, and that's often subject or discipline specific. So they might say, I work in a collection, or I work in an archive, or I work on edition. And in fact, in bringing all of this together under one umbrella term, even recognizing the differences, was a very important first step. But what is special about humanities data? Because the attention on research data, of course, goes across the board and has traditionally come from a more scientific point of view. Well, what do we find with humanities is a lot of manual curation, and that it's a kind of really important aspect of the research process. And we have particularly challenging data sets that require personal individual interpretation, in-depth, close reading analysis in many cases, that of course are not completely arbitrary. They tend to follow standards and consensus, so they are absolutely recognized, academically, but they do provide this additional challenge that needs to be recognized, and the importance of the context. And by context here, I mean not just the context of the project where the data sets were produced, but also the historical context. We often have to deal with historical data sets that are situated in a particular time period where standards, conventions that we have today may not have applied. So all of this contextual knowledge needs to be carefully taken into account when dealing with humanities data. And now we'll focus on the open side of this phrase, and particularly on the open humanities side, because there is actually an official definition of what open means in research, and it stresses three main aspects. One is about availability and access. One is about reuse and redistribution of the data, and the final one is about universal participation. So open data and content, has to be freely used, shared by anyone for any purpose. So that is the broad context in which we are operating. When we talk about extending the concept of openness into research, we really need to consider the whole research cycle. And what does this mean? It means that every aspect and every step of the research can be considered and interpreted in this open sense. So this is a visualization of the so-called open research pyramid that Martin Ribery presented last year, where we can see the main building blocks of research. Well, this is particularly suitable for research that has a computational angle, which totally applies to part of the humanities research, the whole emerging area of computational humanities. But if you take the code bit out, that also applies much more broadly. So you have all the processes and analysis and that goes into the code that gives rise to the research, and that typically would be sitting in a code repository openly available. And we have the data that is either taken from other sources or produced as part of the project that sits in a data repository, ideally open access as well. Then we have the data paper, and we just heard about the important data papers that describe data sets and that again should be open access. We could also have coder papers, which isn't the topic of this event, but equally important in strengthening the impact of code. And then finally, we have the research paper. It kind of sits on top of all of this elements of the pyramid and relies on all these different components. So what is important to stress is that it's not just a research paper that should be open access. There's a lot of emphasis on that, but all these other elements should be. So going back to open humanities, so we know that open science commonly refers to efforts for making outputs of research openly available, and this totally applies to humanities. There is, depending on which country you live in, you may consider that science and humanities are two separate things, or you may consider science as meaning research in general. So, it's something useful to make the distinction, but these principles totally apply to humanities and open humanities research. So we're talking about the research process. What does this look like in practice? Well, let's imagine we have a range of sources that we analyze, and we do that through a combination of automatic processing via code or analysis that is done manually and reading from other sources. So all of this is together part of the research process, which traditionally leads to a research article. So what's left out of this process is the fact that sometimes we do create resources, we do create data sets as part of the process. And we may not have access to certain types of text. For example, we may need to source them and do lots of work to, for example, edit them and put them in a format that can then be analyzed. So all of this, is really valuable work that normally is left out of the final output, in the sense that it's not normally properly recognized. Another aspect is left out consists of additional data sets that are created as part of the analysis. So this could be, for example, spreadsheets where the researcher adds very important extra features that are then critical to the interpretation. And again, these tend to be left out of the main output. So that's where data papers come in very handy, because they do offer that space where to publish these additional resources, which are so critical to the process. This is an example of a data set that was deposited in Zenodo. It's a corpus of epigraphy from the Italian peninsula in the first millennium before Christ. So, very important new contribution to the community. And then the data paper is a description of that same data set. And what differentiates the two is that the data paper not only is peer-reviewed, and so it constitutes a proper academic output, unlike the data set which was deposited, but it also provides that context that is sometimes absolutely critical in understanding the data. Because the data is, could be in the form of just a table. What we as humans need is to understand what the table columns mean, how the data was selected, what criteria were used, what limits are there to keep in mind when analyzing the data. So that's where data papers can contribute to filling this gap in the publishing landscape and provide an additional route where to publish and get credit for all this extra work. So both in terms of creating a resource that is standalone and can contribute to the to the community, or creating additional data sets that are kind of needed to understand and reproduce the research that we've done. And this is an example from linguistics. It's a paper that I wrote before becoming editor-in-chief of the journal. So what we did, we analyzed this spoken British national corpus, and we wrote the traditional paper where we looked at certain verbs like give and how they're used in the corpus. But then we had a lot of data that we wanted to share because in doing this analysis, we actually added a lot of extra information to the corpus. So we looked at, for example, what type of thing is being given and what type of entity is the giver. And look, depending on these properties, we drew some conclusions about the use of these verbs. And so we put the data in a repository, and we published a data paper that kind of contextualizes the data set. And this is what it looks like. We can describe the data set, we summarize the methods, we show who did it, who created the data set, when, and how to interpret the actual data set. And very importantly, we also had a section on reuse potential, because a data set to be actually useful, it needs to be reusable. So the Journal of Open Humanities data fits into this very dynamic landscape. It was launched in 2015 by Ubiquity Press as part of a family of meta-journals, as they call it, which focus on non-traditional research outputs like research data, software, and hardware. And the vision of the journal is to be a key part of a thriving community of scholars sharing humanities data. So it is about building that community, or at least, since the community already exists, to kind of, support it and be part of it, and help drive it and move it forward. So the team has been growing from just one person to quite a few between editors, copy editors, social media editors, and we're all volunteers working for the journal for free, and we are researchers ourselves, which is an important aspect because it means that we have a direct experience with actually doing the research and publishing data and research. And we also have an interest in looking at level, and I'll say a few words about what I mean in a couple of minutes. So the journal publishes two types of papers. So thinking back at the definition I was given in the first talk, it is a journal that purely publishes data papers, but we have two categories. One is the so-called short data papers. So they are 1,000-word, really structured texts that describe data sets. So they follow quite a strict template where we have creator, location of the data set, method, and then we have a final section on reuse potential. We also recognize that researchers may need a bit more space to elaborate on challenges of and topics around research data. So that's why we also publish so-called full-length research papers. And these are up to 5,000-word narratives that give authors a bit more space to discuss the challenges of creating a particular data set, or more broadly, certain perspectives on issues around open data. So we published 74 papers so far, and actually the journal has been growing quite a lot since I took over. So there are two main kind of multidisciplinary data journals for the humanities: JODE, the Journal of Open Humanities Data, and Research Data in Humanities and Social Sciences. So you can see the two journals kind of were on the same level for a while until a couple of weeks ago, where we kind of really shoot off. And we're trying to make it really easy for people to submit to the journal, but also to accept this new concept of data paper, which is still quite new. So we have a list of repositories where we kind of encourage authors to deposit their data set. It is actually a requirement to have the data set in an open repository, but we have, for example, specific instance of the Dataverse for the journal authors. And then we have a simple kind of pathway to publication, which goes through the judicial process, peer review, typesetting, copy editing. We actually also made an effort to reach out to specific communities, because we recognize that humanities is really such a broad field that what works for one discipline may not work for another. So we also launched special collections, which are thematic sets of articles and that have kind of coherent scope. So we currently have a few open, one about computational humanities, one about language documentation, one about COVID-19 data sets in the humanities, one about digital humanities teaching. But we also have the general collection, we publish on a rolling basis. So the scope of the journal, what I said, is very broad, and we actually did an analysis of what disciplines are most represented in JODE compared to the other journal. And actually the two journals, in spite of having humanities in their title, are quite different in scope. And Research Journal of Humanities and Data Science is actually more towards the social sciences and history, but also literature, whereas JODE is more on kind of traditional humanities fields with a strong emphasis on computational and linguistics fields. So we're actively seeking to fill the gaps and kind of publish in areas that are underrepresented. Well, I would like to share also all the activities that we've been doing, because that's part of creating our community and part of sending that message about what it means to write data papers in the humanities. So we took part in several conferences, the LUBER conference last year, various roundtables, digital humanities conferences, open humanities conferences, and also scientometrics conferences. We also are quite active on Twitter, so we have a brilliant social media editing team, and we launched an initiative that we called Show Me Your Data. It's a hashtag Show Me Your Data, where we invited our authors to share a screenshot, an image that was particularly representative of the data set that they describe in their paper. And that's meant to kind of demystify the idea of data in the humanities. It is something that still puts a lot of people off. So we want to show that actually it's not that bad. This is what my data set looks like. And this has been quite successful and has really helped send this message. We've also organized events ourselves. We call them Open Humanities Data Forums, and we have recordings on our YouTube channel. And I mentioned at the beginning that we as researchers running the journal, we also have a meta interest in this. So we actually published 2 papers so far about data papers, and one is just come out in the special issues publications. It's an NDPI paper, so you can check it out. It's called Deep Impact, and then the other one is still in press, and it's written in French. So we're trying to speak to different geographical audiences. So from the Deep Impact paper, I just want to show you a couple of more slides before I wrap up. So what we did is we wanted to really measure the impact of data papers. So we looked at this triangle of research papers, data papers, and data sets. And then we tried to gather metrics that could help us measure impact. So we had citations, we had downloads, we also had views and all metrics. And then we looked at correlations between these different metrics. So we found a range of different correlations that broadly point to papers that have data papers associated to them having a high impact. So these plots show on the left the citations of research papers that have a data paper associated to them versus just research papers in general. And you can see that the distributions do overlap, but the papers with data papers associated with them do tend to be cited more. And then the plot on the right shows altmetric views. So these, for those who are not familiar with the term, altmetrics measure impact in things like Twitter or Facebook likes. So the alternative to traditional academic impact metrics. And here again, we compared research papers that have data papers associated with them with general research papers, and we found again a positive impact of in the former group. And in this other paper, in this other plot, you can see the data sets that have data papers associated with them versus all data sets. So this helped us answer the question of whether data papers not only helped research papers, but also general data sets. So if you put your data online and you share it in a repository, is this enough, or does it help to have a data paper associated with your data set? And it does look like it does help. In terms of downloads and views, we see that data sets that are published also and described in a data paper do get more downloads and more views. So all in all, there is quantitative evidence to show that the data papers do help in this triangle, both the research papers but also the data set. So the journal is very active. We have a Twitter account, we have a newsletter, we have a YouTube channel, and please feel free to follow us in any of these forms, and also look at our publications. Thank you very much.
Thanks so much, Barbara. There was so much useful information in there. I learned quite a lot. Never heard of that journal before, so thank you for bringing it to my attention. Okay, so we'll hand over for some questions. I have one straight off the bat, but if anyone else would like to put their questions in the chat, feel free. There's often some hesitancy for researchers to share their data, and this is sometimes field or discipline specific as well. So how can we go about reassuring authors that it's okay to share their data, it's good to share their data, to make the sharing of data become more mainstream, as Maria-Lisa referred to in the first presentation? That's kind of to anyone who wants to jump on that, really.
Oh, I can make a start.
Go for it.
Something that I hear a lot, and I experience myself as a researcher. Especially in the humanities, there is this fear that if I put my data online, openly available, someone else might use it and steal it and then publish results based on it. And what I tend to say is that, well, first of all, if you created the data, you're the one who knows it the best, and you have an advantage over everyone else. So the likelihood of someone else beating you on the exact same topic you're working on is very low. But what could easily happen is that someone takes your data and does something else with it. And that's absolutely great news, because it means that you're actually having an impact. And the other objection I sometimes hear is, oh, well, I put so much effort into creating this data set that is manually curated, and now someone else can just download it and save all of that time. And I would say to these people, well, would you prefer someone else who had to go through the whole process again? Would that not be sort of a bit of a waste of time? Because you're not losing anything by actually putting your data out there for someone else to use, as long as they can cite you and then you are getting the academic currency that is universally recognized as such. So yeah, these are the ways I tend to respond, but it doesn't take all of the fear away. Sometimes with just having done it once, actually is the best, the best counter argument, and then people do realize it's not actually that bad. But yeah, I'm not wonder if others have more to add from their disciplinary background.
Yeah, building on that point, I think the benefit is always accumulative and it's never subtractive. So yeah, by putting your data out there, it can only be built upon. And as you say, like the idea of scooping is a bit of a myth, because, you know, as the original data creator, you're entitled to that attribution in the first instance. So you're only going to benefit from others using that same data set and hopefully open up bigger opportunities, because it's not just your data that's going to be used in isolation. It can be combined with other people's data. It can be reinterpreted in different ways. It can be built out from, revisualized, and that can only be a good thing.
Yeah, I think it was a question in the most recent State of Open Data reports about whether, you know, how would you feel about being mandated to share your data? And in most cases, people said that they didn't want to be mandated to share it. It should be up to the authors to choose whether they want to share their data. But then on the flip side of that, they asked, would you use somebody else's data that had been publicly available, or have you ever done that? And the majority of people had done so. So they seem to be willing to share it, but not wanting to be mandated to share it, which is an interesting question in of itself. Okay, let's see what questions we have. So we have a question for Barbara from Francesco Varato. Does this kind of correlation depend on the fact that researchers publishing data are also the ones who already have a name in the field? So the higher download count of their papers is not necessarily related to the association of the data sets being available. And did you try to sort of account for that in your analysis?
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for the question. It did occur to us, and yes, we do agree that there isn't necessarily causation effect. So publishing data papers doesn't lead to necessarily to high impact in it on its own, and there are confounding factors, as you say. It could be that the papers are, you know, good or better to start with, and so that's absolutely likely. So that's why we are planning further studies to look at more, you know, multivariate techniques for teasing out these effects. And on the model of that +1 paper that we published, where we presented a linear regression model where we could identify the effect of factors like H-index of the author, for example, and kind of separate out the effect of that and the effect of the data side. So yes, more on this to come. Watch this space. Thank you.
And I have a question for you, Barbara, as well, actually. You mentioned, I really loved the Show Me Your Data campaign. I thought that was a really cool initiative, and it must have been really nice to see like everyone's data, and like you say, sort of demystify the fact that data has to be numbers in a spreadsheet or whatever people think it is. And this is definitely something that I think we've seen on Open Research Europe as well. So how important is it, I guess, to have guidelines that are discipline specific when speaking to researchers about data, and to really try to drill this message home that data might not be what you first think that it is, and that even if you think you don't have data to share, you might actually have some.
Yes. Well, so we don't have discipline specific guidelines, but we do tailor a message depending on the audience we speak to. I mean, one complicating factor is that we tend to speak to digital humanists as a group, and digital humanities is such a heterogeneous group because it often includes people who have, you know, could be coming from history or linguistics or classics, but they all use digital methods, and so they are under the umbrella of digital humanities. But that's also a plus, because it means that people also tend to get together as a community more easily, and so tend to break down some of these disciplinary barriers. But yes, I mean, sometimes it comes down to terminology. So going to librarians and archivists who talk about collections, but to linguists who talk about corpora, and yeah, and then it doesn't stop here. And to ancient historians that talk about editions or about epigraphy and so on. So I'm a linguist myself, so I'm particularly also interested in the terminology here, and it'd be interesting to see how much of this terminology is converging as we all kind of gathering, converging, yeah. But thank you. The special collections also helped us tackle and address individual sub-communities. Yeah, that was definitely useful.
Anyone else have anything? Yeah, Sam?
I was just going to go back to the previous question, actually, as an answer popped into my mind. So one of the pushbacks, if you like, when asking people to provide their data is that the data is sensitive and they don't want to reveal the details of the participants in that data, for example. And I just wanted to point everyone to a really useful looking tool. I can't say I've used it myself, but it has been one that's been referred to me, which is an open air tool, which is an anonymization tool. So I'd just like to drop that into the chat if anyone wants to follow that up. So yeah, I just wanted to go back to that, loop back to that.
Thank you. And then given the audience that we have with us today, how can libraries or librarians become involved in sort of promoting researchers to share their data, or should they be involved in promoting them? And how can they be involved perhaps in the training around making sure that authors and researchers are equipped with all the tools like that one, perhaps, that they need to allow them to share their data effectively and in a fair way?
If I may something about this, is something I have thought a lot about, how libraries can like promote concept of data journals and data papers, because it's not commonly known among researchers, even some research fields where there are well-established data journals. So maybe when you give a research data management training, you could introduce this concept when you talk about publishing data, opening data, then you could add this to your training material. Just tell that these are the and make them maybe discuss about data papers. Like we had a very nice discussion about merit and credits from data papers. Is it only one article, or is it worth of 10 articles? Because work behind is so much bigger than only like collecting very big corpus. It takes years, and writing an article takes only a couple of months, maybe. So discussing about this, because we don't have a good meritation systems for others than research articles. And then maybe if you are reviewing or commenting DMPs, and you can see that there will be a great data set coming, you could, if they don't mention that they are going to write a data paper, you can recommend it and explain why it should be good to have and write a data paper of this collection you will create. And these are the ways I was thinking, and maybe of course these libraries which have open platforms for e-journals, you could promote creating a new journal, which could be a data journal for some specific research fields that is strong in your university.
Yeah, thank you. I think those are really great suggestions, and I think there's definitely more that can be done, partnering between libraries and publishers and other sort of groups working on open data to improve education around these data papers for researchers. Sam and Barbara, did you have anything to add on that?
Yeah, just that I think libraries have a really important role to play here. And increasingly we're seeing libraries adopting more and more of an active role in the data space. And so, I mean, we as a journal are also increasingly working with people from libraries to really kind of fill that gap, because it's absolutely necessary to have that conversation. Should not just be in between academics. It would be missing a critical part. So yeah, and if anyone from the libraries world would like to contribute to the journal, we're actually looking to refresh the editorial board in these weeks. And so yeah, I'm very happy to have a conversation about this.
Excellent. Well, everyone will get your slides after the meeting, so they can look you up and get in touch with you if they're interested in getting involved a little bit more. I did want to throw out one final question, unless there's any other questions from the audience. How do you think that the recent reform of research assessment agreement will have any impact on the sort of openness to open data and to creating these data papers? It specifically mentions it's going to try to give, or a commitment to give, more credit to researchers that are practicing open research methods, including sharing their data. So do we think that this is a step in the right direction, and can we see sort of action coming from this somewhere down the line to sort of help with this publishing idea? Maybe I am alone in that thought. Okay, well, if there's no further comments or questions from the audience, then I think we can leave it there. So thank you very much to all of our speakers. I think we all learnt a great deal about publishing our data, and it was really nice to see some of the data that you actually had on that, Barbara, about the impact, the real world impact that it can have, and the impact for the researcher as well. So thank you very much for sharing that. Thank you everyone for coming. And as we mentioned at the beginning, the recording will be available on YouTube, and the slides and the link to that will be sent round to all of the registrants afterwards. So thank you very much, and have a lovely rest of your day.